efforts to aid São Tomé and Príncipe's President Carlos Vila Nova has won a second five-year term, securing more than 55% of the vote and avoiding a runoff, according to preliminary results. Vila Nova ran as an independent after splitting with the party that first brought him to power. The cocoa-producing island nation in the Gulf of Guinea, about 250 kilometers off the coast of Gabon, is regarded as one of Africa's most stable democracies. But the president began a new term facing economic challenges and a politically divided landscape. Professor Gerhard Seibert is a research associate at the Center for International Studies at ISCTE, University Institute of Lisbon, author of several books on the history and politics of São Tomé and Príncipe, and one of the world's leading experts on the country. He joins us now to unpack the election results and what it means for the country, especially politically. A very good morning to Professor, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Yeah, thank you very much for your invitation.
Just a brief history of President Carlos Vila Nova's tenure and what led him to victory. But as I mentioned in the introduction, that there seems to be a chasm between him and the party that brought him to this position. Can you just explain to us also the politics behind that?
Yes, I think it's also important to know in the case of São Tomé and Príncipe, it's a small country, which also means it's a small political environment. On last Sunday in the elections, there were only 142,000 registered voters. So this is a small political case. It might be comparable with a neighborhood in Johannesburg. So, nevertheless, as you said, it's considered a relatively stable multi-party democracy. The elections on last Sunday were the eighth presidential elections since 1991. Okay, coming to the concrete case. Carlos Vila Nova has now been elected for his second term, where he was first elected in 21. And at that time, he was the candidate of the ADI, the Independent Democratic Action. It's officially the ruling party since the last legislative elections in 22. So at that time, Carlos Vila Nova, who has been before a minister in governments of the IDI, chaired, led by Prime Minister Patrice Trovoada. And the former Prime Minister Patrice Trovoada is also a key figure in politics in São Tomé and also in this case. So in his first term, Carlos Vila Nova, he was a true ally, loyal to Patrice Trovoada. But during the year 24, personal and political cleavages between the two became permanent. And at the end of the year, the relationship between the two was already worsened. And this culminated in the beginning of 25, in early January. The president, Carlos Vila Nova, he dismissed the Prime Minister Patrice Trovoada. And this dismissal of the Prime Minister also resulted in a split of the ADI, the Independent Democratic Action, that had been chaired by Patrice Trovoada since 2001, since more than 20 years, without any contestation. So he was really, Patrice Trovoada, he was really the leading figure, the uncontested leader of the IDI. And this has completely changed since 25 January. So since then, there was a new prime minister appointed, Americo Ramos, who is still in power. And now the Patrice Trovoada, who is still a strong man behind the party, there is also a question if he is still the party leader. Officially, he says he is, but on the other side, Americo Ramos recently was elected as IDI leader by the faction who is supporting him. So we are talking about a divided party, a divided ruling party. It is split. The party has 30 elected deputies in the 55 member National Assembly. But currently, 1/3 of the parliamentarians support Americo Ramos, the government, or the prime minister, while 2/3 still are in favor of Patrice Trovoada. So now in the presidential elections, what was at stake is also the influence and the power of the divided factions, which means Patrice Trovoada, he endorsed another candidate, a competitor, Nito Abreu, a young man called Nito Abreu, a candidate in his 40s, in his early 40s, who was defeated on last Sunday. He gained only 41% of the votes. So then we can also interpret these election results as a victory of the political faction opposed to Patrice Trovoada. So politically, the re-election of Carlos Vila Nova also signifies a defeat for Patrice Trovoada and the political forces supporting the former prime minister. So, but the election in São Tomé presidential elections, in fact, are less important than the general legislative elections, which are scheduled for next September, because São Tomé and Príncipe has a semi-presidential system, which is very rare in the African context, because in this system, the head of government is not the president of the republic, which is in this case Vila Nova, but it is the prime minister, Americo Ramos. He is the head of government. So in the case of São Tomé, the head of the state, the president, does not have executive powers, or he has very few executive powers. So which means his election does not mean necessarily a change of politics or a new political program. But it's important for the local political environment, because his re-election, as I said, I think is a victory also for the government, because it was the government of Americo Ramos and the most important opposition parties who supported the re-election of Carlos Vila Nova. And the candidate of the IDI, of the majority fraction, loyal to Patrice Trovoada, was defeated. I think this is the most important interpretation of these elections.
The importance is the parliamentary elections, but I wonder if the fallout between the president and Prime Minister Patrice Trovoada have caused some institutional tensions which can challenge São Tomé and Príncipe's legacy of being a stable democracy.
Well, I think there has already been a long period also of instability in the country. Because, for example, only in two legislatives from 2014 to 2018 and 2018 to 2022 were completed. The 4 years of the legislatives were completed, and in all other cases and all other elections since 1991, there were interrupted governments, there were government changes, there were weak coalition governments. So there has already been some record of this kind of political instability uh, in this context of weak governments that did not reach the end of the legislature. So what is new now, that the political instability is provoked by a split in the ruling party. I think this has never occurred before. But I think possibly the legislative elections, they have the potential to clarify the situation. Because I think the two factions of the IDI, they won't find together, because the differences, also the personal and political cleavages and contradictions are too great. So they won't reunite. So I think this I think the political struggle will go on. There is also the question now, if this Americo Ramos, who was recently elected as new party leader, as new leader of the IDI, if his election will be recognized by the Constitutional Court, uh, because the Constitutional Court here has to approve the election of this party leader, and this has not yet occurred. As I said before, Patrice Trovoada and his majority faction in the National Assembly, they don't recognize the election of Americo Ramos as new IDI leader, which means...
Professor, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it there because we have run out of time, but I wish we had more time to speak to you. But we appreciate your time and your insights. Professor Gerhard Seibert, who is a research associate at the Center for International Studies, speaking about the recently held elections in São Tomé and Príncipe. It brings the time to just a little after 8 o'clock. It's time now for your news, which I need to long up.
The sound of Africa, starting strong, rise and shine.